Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see people trickling in. Lynn, what's going on? Mario, Lindsay, what's happening, everyone? We're going to get started in just a minute here, but happy Wednesday. Okay, I gotta say, this is just so, look at these attendees counts going up. We've been doing webinars for like 4 years now at Headset, and especially throughout the pandemic, these were a really important part of us kind of continuing to educate the market. And so traditionally, retailers have been a little bit harder to get mind share from because y'all are so busy. And so this is really exciting to watch this attendee count just continue to rise. So welcome, welcome. I see a lot of friendly names from all around the country. So this is very cool. Tracy. Oh, cool. Mohammed, you just learned about Headset. Awesome. Well, welcome. Eric, what's happening? Andrew, thank you for the excitement. Okay. Okay, well, what do you guys think? Alan, welcome from New Jersey. Awesome, happy to have you. Joe, Krista, Coop, what do we think? Are we ready to roll here?
Ready as I could be.
Rock and roll.
All right, let's do it. Awesome. Joe, take it away.
All right, I'm gonna kick it off. Hey everyone, my name is Joe Cullen. I'm a customer success manager here at Headset. And first and foremost, we want to thank you for joining us wherever you are. We hope that you are well, that you are in good spirits, good health, and we really appreciate you making time to meet with us today. We are less than a month away from 420, the most magical day of the year, and I'm sure that many of you are already busy planning your 420 strategy. To those of you who are in the weeds and in the depths of planning, you can think of today's webinar as a tune-up to help with some last-minute tweaks. And for those of you who are just now thinking about 420, today's content will be a good baseline for how you might want to approach or kickstart your holiday strategy. Recently, I've been chatting with a lot of retailers about 420, and with so many markets now loosening COVID restrictions and mask mandates after 2+ years in lockdown, there's been a lot of excitement for this return to some sense of pre-pandemic normality as we anticipate the return of in-store shopping and the opening up of communal spaces. I know I'm personally excited, but I'm also reminded every day that there is no normal in this industry. People love to say that this industry operates in dog years, that 1 year is really equivalent to 7. And though sometimes I think that analogy is a little overplayed, the reality is it's so true. Just in the past year, we've seen new rec markets emerge like Montana, with New Jersey hopefully following suit in the next couple of weeks. We've seen the continued growth of Gen Z shoppers, with females really leading the charge as they've matured into the market. And we've witnessed pretty significant pricing compression in Canada amidst the backdrop of so many other things. And so it's critical to stay on top of these trends because at the end of the day, 420 is still the single most important sales holiday in cannabis retail. And if you want to get the most out of that holiday, you really need to be sensitive to those changes and prepare for them. So Headset has been tracking and analyzing these fast evolving trends since 2015. And we've done that by way of 3 core solutions. The first being Insights, which is our market intelligence product that provides real-time access into market level data, now serving 14 markets across the US and Canada. The second solution we offer is Bridge, and Bridge is a tool that enables retailers to directly share sales and inventory data with their vendors to facilitate a more collaborative relationship, modeled off of a common retail practice called VMI, or vendor managed inventory. And lastly, retailer, which most of you are likely using, is a business intelligence tool that's designed for cannabis retailers to really better understand their customers and their main business revenue drivers. I do want to briefly touch on the methodology for how we source and forecast our market data, which we'll be using today throughout our presentation, because I know we'll probably have some questions in that area. So this visual kind of outlines our methodology. And the first step of our data process is really sourcing our data, which begins at the dispensary level. So we collect data from participating retailers through their point of sale system. We then aggregate all of that data, anonymize it, or strip it of identifiable information, and then we standardize it through a combination of both computer robots and humans that ensure data quality. Lastly, we take a sample of that data set and we apply some fancy inferential statistics to create a market forecast or projection. We're also very lucky to be joined today by the Vetrina Group, which is a woman-owned cannabis consulting group that not only keeps close tabs on these consumer trends, but also turns those insights into actionable and profitable next steps, with really a focus on these three core areas, so operations, inventory, and employee management. If you're interested in learning more about the Vetrina Group and how they can help with your business, we'll be including some contact info and ways to get in touch in our follow-up. So for today's agenda, Headset Senior Data Analyst Cooper Ashley will first examine historical sales and demographic trends that will provide some context for what to expect this 420. And then Krista Raymer, co-founder of the Vetrina Group, will round out the conversation with how to take those insights and apply them to your retail operations through actionable steps. And then we'll finish today with a Q&A session moderated by Jocelyn Sheltraw, Headset's Director of Industry Relations. I do want to quickly mention before I pass it off to Cooper that this webinar will be recorded and sent to each of you in a follow-up email. And if you have any questions, please use that chat feature in the webinar toolbar below. All right, Cooper, let's dig into the data.
Thanks, Joe. I'm really happy to be here talking to everybody, and really happy to be with Krista today. She's going to help us turn some of this data that we have into really actionable insights for you guys. And you'll have to excuse my really sunny shoulder here. I just moved into a new office and blinds are still on the to-do list, so I'll try to stay out of the sun there. So I want to start by, as Joe said, by talking about 420 historically, because there's a lot of things we can learn from past 420s, even in this young industry, that we can apply to this coming year and future years, I think. But then we're also going to move into some, conversation about how short 1 year is in cannabis. This time last year, the cannabis industry was different than it is today. We all know that it moves so quickly that you have to also take into account more current trends when you're planning for any event, especially 420. And then finally, for the first time, I've analyzed 420 a lot over the last few years. And this year I did something new, which was really fun, which was to look at demographic trends in who is showing up for 420 more than other people. So that'll be where we'll wrap up. So first, this is a graph with sales increases on 420 in the US, and sort of our most longest lasting, our oldest US cannabis markets: California, Colorado, Nevada, Oregon, Washington. And so we're going to look at this type of analysis a lot today, so I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So when we see that, like for 2018, the 420 sales increase was 104%. And so what we're comparing it to is for the date 420 in comparison to the average of the previous 4 same days of the week. So last year in 2021, 420 was on a Tuesday. So that 121% sales increase is 121% sales over an average of the previous 4 Tuesdays. So as we can see by those purple bars, as we move from top to bottom, is they're all over 100% sales growth. So that means on 4/20, you can expect sales to double in the US versus the previous 4 weeks. Even in 2020, it was a little bit lower, but it's still, we hit that 100% mark where sales were truly double of the previous 4 weeks. We can also see the orange bars there, that's the relative increase in discounts. So it's also a massive time for discounting. Customers are going to be expecting promotions on 4/20. It's part of the celebration. They're there to shop. They're there to get a good deal. I think one thing that stands out on this chart is 2020. So that was, of course, really early on in the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of states were still locked down or just coming out of lockdowns. There was a lot of uncertainty. COVID caution was much higher than it is today. But even still, we had that big growth. But I do think it's interesting how sales growth and the growth in discounting were actually closer that year. The discounts were higher, sales was a little bit lower. And that's actually the only year in the past 4 or 5 years where 4/20 has not been the single biggest day of sales in the US. Every other year, and I think we can expect that this year as well, 4/20 is like, if you take 365 or 366 days in a year and look at them all, 4/20 is the highest day of sales in every year. In 2020, because of COVID, it was actually New Year's Eve, interestingly. So let's take a look at Canada next. Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So this is data from Canada, Alberta, British Columbia, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. And here we can see a pretty different picture. Sales growth is still pretty significant, but it's much, much less than in the US. So we had like 59% sales growth on 4/20 last year. And then those discount bars, that relative lift in discounting is much larger. But that's, of course, because the average discount in Canada is consistently much lower than in the US. So that base that we're doing a relative increase on top of is much lower. So like in 2021, that's a rise from about 2% to about 6%. Next slide. And here we're switching back to the US, and this is kind of a graph to show like when people show up on 4/20, what are they looking to buy? So this is that same metric, relative sales growth, but we split it out by category. And the purple is 2020 and the green is 2021. So over there on the left, we can see in terms of relative sales growth, beverages are the consistent winner year over year. We see that across pretty much all cannabis holidays. That's a category that customers really like to choose when they're celebrating. And then we also see concentrates, flower, edible, and pre-rolls as the other sort of most successful categories. What I think what we can maybe take away from this is that these categories are a little more often communal. They're easier to share. They're a little more indulgent. Like we see that big sales growth in concentrates last year. I think, if somebody's maybe buying a concentrate when they don't usually, that might be sort of like, I'm looking for the psychoactive effect of THC today, even if that may not be my priority every day. And then if we move over on the right of the graph, vapes, tinctures, topicals, and capsules. So the farthest right, tinctures, topicals, and capsules, I always think of as kind of our wellness categories. Those are customers who maybe aren't looking for as much of a psychoactive effect. Maybe they're trying to target certain symptoms. They're looking for something that's really consistent and dosable. And I think vapes fall into that category as well. So what we see here is a pattern of 4/20 being about celebration of cannabis, a little bit about partying, a little bit about, trying something new, but maybe not a capsule is what you're going to try. We'll take a look at the trends in Canada next. And so this is quite a bit different in terms of relative sales growth, but we can actually see the pattern is pretty similar. So we've got beverages on top, along with edibles, concentrates. Tinctures are over there, which is interesting, but you have to keep in mind that beverages, edibles, concentrates, tinctures, and topicals were all part of Cannabis 2.0 in Canada. So they were only released into the market at the very end of 2019. They were really only hitting store shelves in early in 2020. So I think that's why we see that giant sales growth in concentrates, especially in 2020 here, is that's because concentrates were just getting onto shelves when we were doing this analysis. So they were already just having some natural explosive growth regardless of the holiday. But we can see kind of that similar trend. We've got sort of maybe some more party options on the left, maybe some more sort of wellness, less indulgent options on the right in terms of what customers are choosing on 420. Next slide, please. So we've looked a lot at just like raw sales growth here. And I think it's really important to take that metric deeper because increased sales growth can be caused by a lot of things. Especially for retailers, you want to be thinking about your total sales, you want to be thinking about your customers, you want to be thinking about their purchases and their baskets. And so what we can see here, we've got data for the US in green and data for Canada in orange. We've got that total sales volume from last year on the left, so 113% in the US. But then if we look immediately to the right, the next group of columns there, total basket volume, or the number of transactions on 420 increased by 86% over the previous 4 weeks. So we can immediately tell that the primary driver of increased sales on 420 is simply more people coming into your store. So that tells you things about, especially about staffing, about what to expect in terms of just number of people coming in. It's not necessarily that people are buying twice as big of baskets, but it's the same number of people. It's really about that increased customer traffic. And then we can see as we move to the right, average basket size does increase a little bit. So that's like the total cost of a basket in the US was up by 15%. Then the average item price, probably driven by increased discounts, was down by 14%. So that average basket size, even though individual items are cheaper, people are buying more items. So we can see that 33% increase in the number of items per basket. That second, as we can see down there, it was up by 33%. So that's, if on average there was a 3-item basket before, there was a 4-item basket on 420. So you should be looking to capitalize on that nature, make sure that there are fun things that people want to add to their cart. As we saw in the previous slide, we're talking about beverages, edibles, maybe concentrates, pre-rolls, and flowers especially. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's kind of what has happened on 420. Now we're going to shift into some more recent data. So like I said at the beginning, a year in cannabis is a pretty long time, as we all know. And so I wanted to just paint a picture of where we were a year ago and where we are today. So on the top, we can see US category market share in March of 2021. And then on the bottom, we can see it last month, February 2022. And there are some pretty big differences on this graph, especially flower. We see it dropped from 46% of sales last year to 41% of sales this year. That's a pretty sizable drop for our, most dominant, largest category. Vapes, on the other hand, have increased. Pre-rolls have had a very sizable relative increase, jumping from a little under 10% to 12%. And then we also see that edibles increased as well. We'll take a closer look at 2 of those categories next. And so this is flower and pre-roll market share in the US by month over the last year. So I've highlighted there in that box where we were on 420 last year. And then if you move all the way over to the right, we can see that flower has had a pretty consistent drop all the way down to 40% this month to date. And then pre-rolls have steadily increased. And that, those numbers seem pretty small if you just look at them, 10.1 to 12.3%, but that's a 20% increase in the dollars being spent on pre-rolls in the US. That's a major increase that you will definitely should be noticing in your own store. Next slide, please. And so then one final metric here that I wanted to make sure we touch on is, we talk about sales. We talked a little bit about some basket metrics. I think one of the most important basket metrics for retailers when you're thinking about individual products, brands, categories is basket penetration. And that's the number, the percentage of baskets that a certain product lands in. And what I really want to point out here is that we're looking at basket penetration of a few of these categories on March of last year and March of this year. We can see that pre-rolls, while their market share last month was only about 12%, they're in about 30% of baskets. So about 30% of your customers are walking away with a pre-roll in their basket. That makes sense. They're cheap, they're easy to just add on, but that's something that, if you can drive that from 30% to 40% and your average pre-roll costs $6, that's a lot of incremental revenue you're going to add to your store. But what I do think is interesting here is I was just talking about sales share increased by about 20% over this time frame. Basket penetration only increased by about 7%. So what does that tell us, that discrepancy? That means that people are buying more expensive pre-rolls. And that's a trend we've been tracking here at Headset, this surge in multi-pack pre-rolls in the US. Canada's way ahead of us already, but customers are really gravitating towards multi-pack pre-rolls. And that means if you can get a customer to make an impulse buy on a 2.5 gram 5-pack versus a single 1 gram, you're going to be adding even more revenue to each basket. And then I also think that vapor pens are something to keep an eye on this year. They, like we saw, they increased in market share. They've had a pretty equal increase in basket penetration. And so, while they're not typically the 420 choice, maybe they'll be a little bit more this year. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the fun part I'm really excited about. Demographics is always really interesting to look at because we do see really distinct trends usually whenever we look at demographic data across age and gender. And so this is all US data again. And this is again, just relative sales growth by each demographic group that we've identified here, 420 versus the previous 4 weeks. So we can see that female customers were much more excited about 420 last year than male customers. They increased their spend by nearly 2.5 times versus a simple, slightly over double for male customers. And then I think the standout trend here is the response from different age groups. So we can see that Generation Z, especially, were the biggest fans of 420 last year. Millennials also significantly higher than Gen X and baby boomers. So we're seeing younger customers are more excited about being in a store on 420, maybe making purchases that they normally wouldn't. And so that's a really key indicator of how you should tailor your strategy. When I ran this first analysis, my first thought was, okay, 2021, we're still in COVID. Is this trend just because younger customers are going to be more comfortable being in a store in April of 2021 versus older customers? So I decided to compare this to 2019 before anybody had heard of coronavirus. And so we'll look at that next. And so this is the exact same analysis. We're just comparing 2021 in purple to 2019 in orange. And what we can see here is that the trends are pretty darn consistent, especially that Gen Z response being much, much higher than other age groups. You can see that, in 2021, it was 168%, 2019, it was 164%. Gen X and baby boomers were still at the low end, although I do think it's a little bit interesting that baby boomers in 2019 were more excited about 420 than Gen X being the lowest responders there. Let's take another slide, please. And then this, like we just saw a couple slides ago, sales growth on 420 is primarily driven by just more people in your store, more baskets. And so this is a comparison of growth in transaction volume by demographic group last year. And so we can see here, again, that same trend. Gen Z had the highest response, millennials next highest, Gen X and baby boomers down there at the low end. And then within each age group, we see that female customers were more likely to just come out in higher volume than usual. That's a really kind of beautiful, consistent trend there. And next slide, please. Okay, so this is my final slide, but I just kind of want to wrap up. We've identified that sales will probably double in the US. That doubling will be primarily caused by increases in basket volume, more people in your store. The people who are most excited to be in your store are young customers and particularly female customers. And so I wanted to figure excuse the train. I wanted to end the slide with just a quick cross analysis of what do young customers like to buy typically. And this is from last month. This is an index graph. So basically any category that has a value above 100 means that that age group prefers that category or purchases it more than the market average. Any that are less than 100 means they buy it less than the market average. So we can see over on the left for both of our younger age groups, Gen Z and millennials, they really like concentrates. They really like vapes, and they're a little above average for pre-rolls. And that's kind of where the story ends. The millennials are right at average for flower, but Gen Z is below average for all other categories. So while you need to be ready for all of your customers and what they're going to want on 420, sorry, the trains just have great timing. I think this is an important identifier of who you're going to see the biggest growth in, and then what they want to buy. We're talking about concentrates, vapes, and then, you know, probably some beverages and edibles as well. They'll probably buy these more than they usually do on 420. All right, and that wraps it up for me. I'm going to pass it over to Krista to help us apply some of these strategies.
Great train. Really, really great timing. So, hey, everybody, I'm Krista from Vetrina Group. And what we want to be able to do is walk through like what we do with this data. So how do we turn the data into insights and then take those insights and push it into action items as we get towards either planning and analyzing our business today. So, okay, what is the qualitative and quantitative features that we understand that have happened over the last year? To Cooper's point, taking a look at the historical data is really important because it starts to help us benchmark where we are. But what becomes really important, especially as the industry grows and changes so quickly, as we see more products come to the market and or increases in competition through additional retail store density or brand density in the market, we're going to see shifts that have happened in the last year that won't show up in the data. So taking an analysis of what the qualitative and the quantitative aspects are, and then really reviewing it. Okay, so what's first? First, we've got to start as a retailer at what our current state is. So where do we stand today going into 420? One of the biggest considerations that we might want to make off the top is where we're sitting with our inventory. Now, this is a screenshot of an inventory coverage report for the retailer platform. And basically what this report allows you to do is see where you are properly stocked, potentially understocked, or overstocked by category based off of how you've positioned your categories within your POS. And so this data can help us inform kind of like where we are from an inventory position. So if we get started, we're going to say, hey, where are we? Do we have slow moving SKUs? Do we have any excess inventory? Or is there any inventory planning that we need to make going into 420? So to Cooper's point, if we're going to see potentially an increase in the amount of concentrates in store, do we have the right amount of inventory on hand? And when do we need to start to make a consideration about buying that inventory to anticipate that sales growth? So first step, taking a look at our inventory. What we also want to do is, if we can look back historically, if you've been open for an entire year, is say, where was your inventory when you went into 420 last year? Because what doesn't show up necessarily in the data is what are the soft things that happened within the retail environment that might have impacted your sales at that time. So were you understocked last year in concentrates, and did that potentially impact how your concentrate category performed at the time? So these are some of the questions that we want to ask when we look at the historical inventory position and then the inventory position today. So then if you want to just go to, yeah, perfect. So then we want to think about, okay, how are these promotions, or how is 420 going to show up in my store? What we know about 420 so far with that historical analysis, as well as kind of trending data moving into today, is that we want to think about how the customer makes a purchasing decision and what products are getting purchased at what time. 420 is a really great opportunity to think about impulse purchasing. So those products that historically maybe the customer didn't always go into store for. So the customer is going to be driven to the location and often make a decision while they're in store. And so what do we want to do with that information? From a marketing perspective, a customer usually doesn't think about making a purchase or purchasing a product unless they've been prompted with the concept 7 times. So 7 points or 7 touch points typically is like a magical number. So when we're thinking about how promotions want to show up in store, we also want to be able to say, can we create 7 touch points for these promotions? So your 7 touch points could be things like email campaigns going out to your customers who are in your database. This could also include text messaging if that's accessible in your specific market. We also want to think about when the customer gets to the store, what type of signage is applicable? Is it showing up on your menu boards? Are there physical displays showing these products? And leading up to it, can you provide in-bag like mailers almost to be able to highlight for your customer that if they've purchased in the upcoming weeks, that you are going to be doing something particular for 420. So thinking about where you can get all of these 7 touch points within the store becomes a marketing and a merchandising game. And so to be able to effectively communicate with our customer that we've got something great going on and that we're able to increase that velocity or able to increase the total number of people coming to the store, we've got to let people know that we are doing something. We also want to think about what levers we can pull. So we have understood what we are and what position we're in today. We understand what we're going to need to do in terms of being able to create touch points around 420. So what are the actual levers that we need to pull? Well, we need to make inventory purchasing decisions. So we need to decide what product is going to be coming into store. And what you want to be able to do is work backwards. So if you're in Canada, you're probably on a 1 to 3 week purchasing cycle. If you're in the US, it's going to be very specific by market. And so you've got to work back as to when we need to anticipate that. To be able to do that, we also need to forecast. So plan ahead around approximately how much we think we're going to see as an increase in that category. And then you're going to want to bring that amount of inventory in. We're going to want to think about what promotions we're specifically creating. So are they targeted discounts or are they flat rate? Well, what does that mean? Targeted discounts are going to be for specific products. We're going to be dialed in for particular things that we want to highlight for our customers. Sometimes these are used to be able to get slow-moving inventory out of the store. With a more flat rate, we would be looking at an entire category. And so we could be saying, hey, our pre-rolls around 420 are going to see a flat rate discount. And with that, we're attempting to pull a lever to increase the velocity of those products, meaning that without that discount, we wouldn't necessarily see the increase in the number of units that are going to be sold at that time. So now that we've planned our kind of promotions and what types of promotions we're going to be running, now we're going to think about how they can physically show up in store. Physical visual merchandising in store is not only going to drive customer awareness, this is a really great tool for your bud tenders as well. So a physical store is a sales tool. Ultimately, it's enabling our bud tenders to be able to connect the right product with the right customers. And so we want to be able to highlight product for our customers, but we also want to be able to highlight product for our bud tenders so that these are top of mind. And then the last one is going to be bud tender training. So what are we running? How are we communicating it with our teams? And how comfortable do they feel in explaining these promotions back to our customers? Part of this and this exercise in building kind of like a bud tender training plan is going to help define how big or how complicated our promotions are. We've all been in traditional retail environments that exist outside of cannabis, and often these promotions are really complicated. And when you're in store, you can't even calculate it while you're standing there looking at a product. So we want to simplify the messaging, which is going to help with our bud tenders, and it's also going to help our customers better understand what promotions we're running at the time. Okay, so what are our big takeaways then? Overall, we've got some action. What are we seeing in the report that we want to make sure that from today, we've got an opportunity to address and create action points? Well, the first one, 420 sales increases are not necessarily only because we're running discounts, but it's often due to getting additional people in the store. So if we think about how often our customers are coming to the store, this provides us an opportunity to break up that pattern and get them to the store in an additional visit. So this is going to help us drive revenue and velocity of those products at that time. Second one is certain categories perform better than others. And what we want to be able to do is take a step back and say, what does our customer think about when purchasing these products? To Cooper's point earlier, impulse products tend to do really well. Our customer behavior around 420 often includes making a decision while in store or being prompted by a bud tender. And so supplying a customer with options that exist within an impulse category is helpful. Impulse is a little bit about the product and how easy it is to understand, and it's a lot about pricing. And so depending on your market, impulse products usually fall in at and below $20 or $15. So first make an assessment of where you're sitting, and then make an assessment about how easy are the products to communicate about. Number 3, basket penetration is a key metric to be able to analyze product category performance. So what products are going into the basket and when, and how can you change and inform that behavior? So if we understand that pre-rolls potentially get purchased with edibles, the two of these products positioned together in store, for example, might be a really great way to merchandise, but also be able to hit 2 different promotions and build your basket size, as well as increase your velocity of those categories in store. Trends from the previous holidays are really important to understand. And it's really important to understand what influenced that behavior at the time, but it's not going to be the only thing that should drive decisions around this year's 420. And that's because we see such major changes in terms of the product and the assortment that is available today, as well as a number of retail environments across North America. And so we've got to take last year's data and also inform what is happening today in today's market. Within this, I would also say it is really important for you to make a note of everything that you did this 420. What you're going to do is position yourself for next year to be able to clearly look back and understand exactly what actions and behaviors you did. So this should be an outline of what promotions you ran, why you ran them. So like if there were inventory decisions that you made to be able to support those promotions, as well as what visual merchandising or marketing initiatives you made at the same time. It's funny, we're like, oh, we'll remember. Next year, we never remember. And there's so much going on in a retail environment, it's really helpful to note those down. And then the last one, clear goals for the day will help keep everything simplified. What we know is that when we create too much complexity, we don't see a lot of success with the number of discounts. So we want to keep really clear, specific goals around what we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to get more customers in the store? Are we trying to drive additional revenue? Are we trying to highlight a new product? And then we want to identify what levers we can pull to support those. So overall, 420 offers a massive opportunity for us to reconnect with our customer, both from a merchandising, marketing, as well as product opportunity.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Krista and Cooper. If you haven't checked out Headset's recent industry report on 420 and topics that we've covered today, that will touch on a lot of these same takeaways and just provide some additional color. So that will be included in the follow-up email as well. I also want to mention that we are running a 420 special on our retailer premium platform. As a reminder, our retailer solution has 2 components. So we've got Retailer Pulse, which is the free version, and then Retailer Premium, which is a paid for subscription that has built-in analytics for your marketing team, for your inventory purchasing team, sales staff managers, a whole suite of analytics to better understand your customer and core revenue drivers. And if you request a demo or get in contact with our team, you can mention this webinar for 25% off. All right, so now we're gonna open it up to questions. So if you haven't chatted in already, feel free to send us a message, and I'm gonna pass it over to Jocelyn.
Thank you, Joe. We got a lot of questions, so a lot to go through here. Yeah, no, hopefully this is helpful for everyone. Obviously from Headset's end, we're crunching these numbers, we're pulling the data all day long. And so it's super helpful to also have the context from Krista and just how you actually execute on this data. I think there's a lot of insights that you probably learned that are things that you probably have a sense of, you probably know, but it's just good to see the hard numbers. It's good to see it here. And so a lot of the questions are kind of around this. So, so let's just get into it. Okay, so great question from Haley Horn, and Coop, this is for you. So going back to the slide where it was the US sales and average discount lift on 420, Haley wants to know, were these lifts because of 420 promotions, or are these just because the day was 420?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to exactly why, but because this is such a consistent historical trend, and because it's, you know, just seems to be, I mean, I've been, before I worked at Headset, I've worked for an edibles company. I've been in Washington. I was at 420 at retailers, on 420 at retailers, and it's just a party. People are there to celebrate, and they're out in droves. And so I would guess it's more just a cultural event that is also really benefiting the retail space by more customers just wanting to purchase cannabis in the spring, you know? And so I think it's less about people deciding, yes, I'm going to go only because there's good sales. I think it's, you know, that's an added benefit and is going to help them spend more at your store. But I think that initial decision to actually go to the store is probably more of a cultural thing.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that actually too, is to think about what our customer on 420 is doing before they come to the store and what they're going to do after they visit the store. This will give us some hints around like why a product or why a promotion might have worked or why we're seeing an increase in sales. 420 specifically in that kind of millennial and younger category tends to be quite social. It's like a reason to hang out. And so that can be part of what is informing the behavior around what is getting purchased. So there's so many inputs in retail. This question is a really great example of like, why did something create the results that it did? There's so much going on in a store that it is helpful when thinking about what our customer is doing before and after they visit a store around a particular holiday to understand what might be influencing the behavior and the purchasing decisions.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, Krista. Good insight. Okay, this is a question that I found that there's a lot of talk across the country. So flower market share. So we've obviously seen flower market share declining in all of the markets that we're tracking. And so Coop, this one is more for you, but do you know why pre-rolls are seeing more of an increase while just loose flowers seeing decreases in market share?
I have a few ideas. First off, we did just write an industry report previous to our 420 report, kind of on what's going on with category preference right now. And we talk a lot about flower and pre-rolls in there. So check that out for sure. I think when we talk about what's growing right now and what's shrinking right now, we also have to remember that what we're comparing it to was 2020 when the world had gone crazy and the cannabis industry was no exception. I mean, I think if you've been tracking cannabis sales, you'll remember that 2020 was like the biggest year of sales growth we've ever seen. And customer purchasing decisions were really being shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we saw was basket size went up and the frequency of trips went down. So people were stocking up more. People were buying larger package sizes across all categories. And then we did see a real surge in flower and a decrease in pre-rolls. And I think, you know, we can make some pretty safe assumptions that flower is in general seen as like, you know, the best sort of bang for your buck type of product. And we saw customers buying, you know, more larger package sizes in flower. The customers who would usually purchase a 1 gram or an eighth were more often buying a 1/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce or something like that. So we saw that increase in price, average item price, because of the increase in package size. And then pre-rolls, I think we can, I think pre-rolls we can also make a similar assumption about. Like, you think about what you were feeling in April or May or June of 2020 in terms of not knowing what to do about COVID, trying to protect yourself, trying to protect your family. And passing, pre-rolls are social. They're when we gather together. They're one of the top choices of cannabis consumers. And it's also like literally passing something around a group that we put in our mouths. So it makes a lot of sense that they actually declined during COVID. And so what I think we're seeing now is a bit of a resurgence. At first at Headset, we were thinking they were just coming back to normal, but it seems like they really have taken off beyond a previous normal. And one additional factor there is I think there's been a lot of investment and a lot of sophistication in product development in the pre-roll industry over the last year or two. We're seeing the connoisseur infused pre-roll space. So when there's a concentrate involved, rolled in kief, whatnot, those are really taking off. That's by far the fastest growing segment in the pre-roll category. And then, like I mentioned before, we're seeing these multi-packs really start to dominate the market. And I think those are really appealing to customers because the packaging is so great. It's not just a little plastic dupe tube. It's like this nice finished product that's very fun to buy. And then it usually costs more because it's usually a larger package size. So I think that's also driving it.
Mm-hmm.
It also
actually, sorry, Krista, go ahead.
No, the multi-packs make it shareable, specifically when we think about 420. It's like if we are being more social at that time, it gives us a good opportunity to share. And to your point, the product quality and the focus on product development, specifically in the pre-roll category over the last year, has enabled our customers to be able to purchase much better quality products today than they could have historically.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so just building off this question really quickly, because we're getting some additional comments. So one question from Mohammed Abdallah on this. So has there been a price decrease in pre-roll prices from 2020 to 2021? And could this potentially explain the increase of pre-roll consumption?
No, there hasn't actually. It's actually increased in price. It's one of the few categories that has increased in both average item price and average EQ price, which is the price per gram. And I think this is exactly because we're seeing this big shift in what the products are within this category. Multi-packs and infused pre-rolls tend to cost more per gram. And so as we see customers moving to larger package sizes and more highly developed infused pre-rolls, pricing is going up, but that doesn't seem to be stopping customers.
Yeah. It also is important to consider what the reference point of the price is. So if the customer was historically purchasing pre-rolls and is now looking at kind of like the newer products that are entering the market, the reference point for the price is going to be historically what they were. But if the customer was purchasing flower before and is now opening the door to pre-rolls, their reference point around what they usually spend is flower products. And so we usually see customers more willing to spend in that pre-roll category because their reference point was higher when they were purchasing flower products.
That makes sense. Okay, so we're probably going to have less insight on this from both Coop and Krista, but we've gotten a couple questions on this. So e-commerce, D2C, do you all have any insight in how the trends that we're seeing from brick and mortar stores, delivery, compares to e-commerce potentially?
I'll just speak quickly because unfortunately, Headset, we don't have a lot of e-commerce data. One thing we do look at a little bit is delivery. And I think the biggest takeaway from our delivery data is that basket sizes for delivery purchases are consistently much, much larger than in person. So when people are creating a cart online from the comfort of their home, they're choosing to buy more at once. We just published a little tidbit the other day on this data in Michigan from last month, and I think it was something like 50% larger basket sizes, or something like that. We can include that in the email. We see a similar trend in California as well. So larger baskets definitely occur with sort of the non-in-person purchases.
And there could be a couple things that are influencing that as well, is if you are putting in minimum spend requirements for delivery, or there are thresholds that will manufacture, that's a lever to pull to be able to increase that basket size. The other thing too, when we don't just think about delivery, but when we think about your e-commerce space, Often our customers are visiting our websites before they come to the store. And so your e-commerce space becomes maybe not the spot where the transaction is going to happen, but it becomes a really important place for the customer to do their research and be exposed to what you're planning for 420. So in the same way that you're thinking about the touch points that you're creating in store, your e-commerce or delivery space can also act as a touch point for your 420 promotions.
Mm-hmm. So Krista, so speaking of promotions, so another question. So how and when will I know if a promotion is successful?
So we want to first be like, ask ourselves, why are we running this promotion? And that's going to help indicate how we measure if it's been successful or not. So if we are running, I'm going to give an example. You have a slow moving SKU, a product that hasn't sold well historically, and we want to be able to offload it so that we can reinvest that cash in better performing SKUs in the future. In this example, our goal and what our intention is to be able to get the product out. And so we would be looking at a velocity KPI to see whether we've been successful or not. So how many units were actually sold. If, for example, we want to bring in a new product and we have never had it in store before and we're going to feature it for 420, this might be a KPI that we want to measure around gross margin, or what we were able to retain in our profitability in selling this product because of the price that we set it at. And so those are two different KPIs that would give us very different measurements of whether the promotion was successful. But at the end of the day, it was then taking one step backwards and understanding why we're running the promotion in the first place. So promotions for 420 can be a mix of things. It doesn't only need to be slow moving product. It doesn't only need to be brand new products. Putting a strategy together around what that mix of promotions are going to be is where it's really helpful to understand what your customer purchasing behavior is and what you're trying to achieve.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, so another interesting question. Let's go back and talk about some product trends. So when we were looking at the category sales lift, we saw that beverages had the highest lift out of all categories on 420. And so we have a question from Eric Bucci, who's wondering, any thoughts on why Canada struggles to sell beverages on 420 compared to the US? Do you think this is linked to cart limits or THC limits? Any other thoughts?
Do you want to start with the data?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I would sort of contradict that a little bit. I think that if we go back to what we saw in I think the second slide, total sales growth in Canada in general was much lower than in the US on 420. Then that's a pretty consistent pattern we see year over year. It's closer to 50 to 60% growth versus 100+% growth. And so I think if we keep that in mind, beverages were the top responding category in both countries. So that's a pretty consistent trend. And then I will also add that beverages do currently have a little bit higher market share in Canada than they do in the US. So I think that they are, I don't think Canada is struggling to sell beverages on 420. I think Canadian customers don't seem to be quite as respondent to this holiday as US customers do in general.
That could be for a number of different reasons. I mean, if we start to think about what restrictions are in place around promotion, that could be part of it. Specifically with beverages, we've seen a lot of new SKUs come to market if we look back historically over the last year, over the summertime. And so we had limited products in terms of SKU assortment available at 420 last year versus what we kind of ended our summer at. And as we go into this spring and summer in Canada, another massive increase in the number of options available for our customers. So that could be part of it as well. One of the things that we note is in Canada specifically, for beverages have typically done much better in months where there is good weather. And so it could be weather related in there as well. And then depending on who the customer is, and Erin's making a really great point, cart limits as well as THC limits really segment beverages to service a particular type of customer, which isn't necessarily all customers. And so understanding that is a specific nuance within the Canadian market and being able to connect those products with the right customers.
Cool. That's insightful, Krista. Thank you. Okay, so we've got time for probably one more question. I'm going to kind of combine two questions. So one question that we have is, and this is more tactical, so Krista, maybe if you can take this. How early and how many days should you be running the promotions? And then for Cooper, after this, did we look at this data in a 3, 5, 7 day period? This is coming from James Budd, around 420 as opposed to just the day of 420. So maybe Krista, if you could start with the tactical piece.
And the tactical piece could be like, what is our overall strategy first in what we're trying to create with this behavior? One of the things that we note, and this is true in cannabis as well as in traditional retail, that specific holidays and what day they fall in the week can be really impactful to how accessible the customer is to visit the store. So is the holiday in the middle of the week? Is it on a weekend? This could help to inform when the promotion needs to start and stop. So if you are earlier in the week, we often will see, and I think Cooper, we were talking about this very briefly earlier, is that you'll see it start into the weekend before, or if you're later in the week, it might be extended into the weekend after, as an opportunity to capture the most number of customers. Pretty consistent in the data around like what are the busiest days in stores. A Thursday through Sunday tend to kind of be busiest for revenue versus number of hours open. Depending on the market, there's nuances in that for sure, but so taking that into consideration. So one is, how many promotions are we running? What types of promotions are they? And two, is it something that we want to create a blip on the day that is 420, or are we introducing a new category and we're going to use it, or a new product and we're going to use it to leverage this messaging to our customers? Might warrant a slightly longer communication period. So two different ways to approach it. It would depend on what you're trying to achieve with the specific promotion that you're building.
And I'll just add on to that, we didn't really include this year's analysis, but our previous year's 420 report, I did a lot of looking at exactly what you're talking about, what happened leading up to 420, because like last year was on a Tuesday, the year before it was a Monday, and we definitely really do see that increase in sales volume really start the weekend before, and I suspect because we're on a Wednesday, that'll probably happen again. I think customers will be more likely to think about the ramp up to 420 rather than the ramp down from 420. But I would definitely, if we can include that report in the email as well, that would be great, because it really touches specifically on that. There was strong sales growth and increases in discounting in like Friday, Saturday, Sunday before Tuesday 420 last year, and Monday the year previous.
Coop, Krista, are you okay to maybe go over just a few minutes? Because we have some really good questions. So do you have a hard stop?
No, I'm good. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Julian, hello, friend. Okay. So wanted to throw out a question from Julian Butler, wanting to know the best strategy for 421. So how should we be thinking about this after 420 once it's over?
I'll just let Krista handle most of this, but I'll just 421, typically sales collapse. People buy on 420 and they don't come back the next day, is kind of the data that we see. So minimize staffing, maybe even lower than you usually would. This year's on a Thursday, I think would be the only thing I can offer there.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this happen also around other holidays. Like if you think about Christmas Eve, and then a total drop off on Christmas, partially because the store is closed, I'm sure, in a lot of markets. But this is going to be a byproduct or an unintended consequence of running promotions. So this is kind of one of those things where we've got to be able to anticipate that is going to be a byproduct of creating a promotion and running 420. How we want to be able to measure this is obviously taking a look at revenue and the number of customers visiting the store. But we also want to think about what promotions could create longer impact than just one day. So if we, for example, run a discount off of the entire category of a product, how could that impact our customer relationship in the moving into the future? So if our customer purchases every 2 weeks or 1 week or 8 weeks, depending on where you are, what are the unintended consequences by getting all of your customers into the store at that time? And how do we need to plan for that? That is both from to Cooper's point, scheduling concern. We want to be really efficient with our staffing, as well as potentially anticipating this drop off or dip right after in terms of our inventory levels and what we need in store to be able to service the business.
Cool. Good insights there, Krista. Last question, because this is an interesting one from Wendy Kelly. So Easter weekend is prior to 420. Is anyone open on these dates? Or I'm going to elaborate on this question as well. Is there can we expect any differences in sales because of Easter? Like, are people going to be doing Easter promotions? Could there potentially be a decrease in sales because of this? Or will it just not have any impact whatsoever?
The holidays are two different holidays. So who the customer is that we might attract on those two different holidays could potentially also be different. And the promotions that we run could be attracting different customers. So, for example, a concentrate customer who maybe is going to make a decision around purchasing a product that they wouldn't normally do, but it's at a more accessible price point because you're running a 420 promotion, might not then purchase in and around Easter. But Easter historically has done, like in other industries, really well with like impulse driven products. So candies. So we might want to think about edibles specifically and what role they could play in this. And so because the holidays are so close, that might actually impact how and why you make decisions about what products and what categories get promotions on each of those. And this is an example to kind of like go much back earlier into our presentation of a note that we would want to make around what decisions we made for 420 promotions to begin with, because next year you might forget that impacted your behavior. It also, depending on where your market is and who your customer is, might mean that you run a promotion slightly longer than you would have if Easter wasn't right there.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, wonderful. Joe, Krista, Coop, thank you so much for all of this. There were some questions that we didn't get to. So if there's any other questions that our team can help with, feel free to reach out. You can reach out to any of us individually, or just send us emails at like info@headset. Krista, what is your general Vetrina Group email?
Info@Vetrina Group, and you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Right on. Okay, well, hopefully this was valuable for everyone. I love that we're bringing in all the data and all of Krista's insights from Vetrina Group. So hopefully these are very actionable takeaways for you all. And yeah, stay tuned. We will be sending this out via email probably in the next few days. So you'll have a link to YouTube and whatnot and go over these insights again. And if you want to go even further in this, we have that report. It's on our website under the resources tab, which goes over a lot of this information. You can get more of the charts and all of the data in there. So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.